Good morning. I'm Christian Forster, and this is Crumbs Under the Table. I had a couple of days off while I was doing some other things, but back this morning just before church time with my dog, a very noisy banjo, who's very pleased with his stick. Are you going to bring that stick? And Luna, as usual, digging something up. Come on then. Come on then, off we go. You coming? Yeah, you can bring it if you like. No? Okay. Well, anyway, I didn't want to do a long one this morning. So I was just, I mentioned that, you know, one of the days when I wasn't doing these is because I drove up to Stoke and back to record some short kind of bits for the radio for UCB, which will cover the Sermon on the Mount. So I will let you know when they finally go live with those. Oh look, Banjo is he's put it down again. Come on then. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. Oh, here he comes. Nice moving with that stick. Morning.
Hiya. Ready?
So yeah, doing which I'll let you know when they kind of finally get released. But I was just thinking this morning, I didn't want to do something that was long, but many of you will know because I've got animated stuff on my YouTube video about, in my book on Psalms, Jesus and Worship and Wonder, we look at Psalm 78 and that contrast of parables and puzzles, the way that God speaks. But in that psalm, it's got this great little phrase. God says, I've established a testimony in Jacob. And it's not talking about Jacob the individual, it's uses Jacob as a reference for the whole people, and then it doubles up the statement, which is a very kind of typical style in the Psalms and in that kind of more poetic writings. So I've established a testimony in Jacob, and I can't remember what the next phrase is, something or other in Israel. It's not a testimony. Oh, I should have looked it up before I started. A kind of a story or a parable in Israel, and that's kind of, if you like, the backbone of that whole parable. The way that God speaks in parable of that whole psalm, the way that God speaks in these kind of puzzling and parabolic ways to humanity. But what I always think is really interesting is just actually how regularly you get this idea of a testimony. That actually the way that God wants to speak is a narrative that includes people's stories, it includes their lives. And then it goes and then it says of that, I've done those things so that they might tell them to their children, which is really interesting. So because what it says is, if I can find the right way of getting this across, God wants to establish a testimony in our lives, in our stories, in our families' lives, our families' stories. And he wants those to outlive us. And that's often the bit that's missed. So, you know, in my own story, my parents are Christians, Christian leaders, a lot of people will know them. And actually God has established a testimony in their life stories. They have quite remarkable stories. And then, of course, I was born and I became part of that. And some of you will know my diagnosis with cancer. I was 15, given 3 months to live, and so on. So that becomes a testimony. But actually, there's a whole host of little stories, mini stories, not just always the big things, but the things that we do where God leads us, guides us, gives us kind of words. So if I kind of share a bit of my own testimony again, you know, I first did some recordings for UCB 8 years ago, I think it was now, and it came out actually of something that God said to me. So this therefore becomes a testimony. It's not just a bit of story, it's a bit of story that God's directed and guided and made real. And so I've been praying about some things, and it was in a team meeting. We were just looking for the Lord to speak to us, and I had an image of myself, and I was standing on a stage, but there were spotlights. So I couldn't see beyond the kind of front row. I could see some people in the front row. But I became aware as I was standing there that there's a crowd that went back miles and miles and miles, and there are thousands of people. And I found myself saying to the Lord, what are they here for? and you have to apologise, because I have shared this a few times, because it is part of the testimony. But it can sound arrogant when God speaks to anybody, because he always speaks with so much love. It doesn't mean he's not saying that to you too, or in your own way, whatever the things are he says to you. But what I felt the Lord said is, well, they're here because what you've got to say is worth listening to. And the upshot of the whole thing, as I processed it and talked about it with my wife and so on, is I kind of felt God was saying that I needed to get across some of what I was saying in ways that weren't just immediately for the people I could see. And so that helped me make a decision to write the first book I'd written for a while. I wrote one back when I was doing a lot of missions work, which you probably can't buy nowadays. It's called Small Church, Big Vision. I thought it was an okay book, but so I decided I needed to write another one, and so that prompted that. And then I had this opportunity to record some things for UCB Radio. And I thought, well, that's great, because that's another thing. I'll share some thoughts, and there'll be people I never meet, never see. They might hear those things. So I went and recorded some. And about 3 months after they'd gone live, I got an email from New Zealand. A guy who was a loss adjuster. He was driving in the middle of nowhere, no phone signals, but he could get radio. He was listening to UCB radio, and my voice came on for a 1 minute little kind of sound bite on the radio. And he recognised me because for a few months he'd been living in the UK, based in the UK, and he'd come to our church. And so he tracked down my email address and sent me an email just so you know. And it was a real nice one of those just lovely little kind of testimonies. So this is partly why I was thinking about doing the UCB things again, to the truth of that image that I felt the Lord was given me, which is that there'll be people who I could never really see, but it was useful for them what I was teaching or saying. And so in many ways that as a word has shaped a lot of what I've done since, including probably these, which I don't want to kind of make it sound arrogant. We have to find the right balance of genuinely valuing what it is that God has led us into, because he values us. But without, I don't want to kind of make that sort of competitive in any sense, because I believe it for everybody. I believe everyone has that place of calling. And it's not necessarily in the big things. Actually, that's very often the truth of the way things work nowadays. I see immediately very little fruit from very often the things I do. Just every now and again I get these kind of testimonies back, and that was not unique. I've had several others since. But as a kind of more general truth, I think it is something that you find is in God's heart for every testimony. It says in Revelation that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And the establishing of a testimony is kind of the leaving of a legacy, because it's something that can be told to the children, i.e. those who've come after you. And actually, if you stop and we think about our Christian lives, obviously they hang together around the person of Jesus Christ. But actually, in practice, we've often found that it's the people who walk just a little bit ahead of us, or those who are a bit older than us but who are walking alongside us, and their testimony is part of the inspiration that shapes us, that helps God to speak to us and nurture us, and to show us the things that he's uniquely giving for us, rather than just generally true. And so, if you like, there is a general truth in the fact that actually there is something about the way in which we need to become clear and confident in articulating our particular little piece of the testimony. And none of us will have the full story, but for all of us it is a part of the story of the cross, because the word of their testimony is put there right alongside the blood of the Lamb, because of course it's made real by the sacrifice of the cross, by the work of Jesus. So the work of Jesus actually has given us the possibility to write a story, to work out what it means with its. And here's the key thing: you go back to that psalm. It's not just the successes that are the testimony; it's also the failures and how God is with them and is faithful to them even in the times of failure. That's where the testimony comes from. So I want to, because I said I want to make this morning a short kind of thought. I keep going on for far too long. Really just wanted to kind of get that across, is to encourage everybody to become confident in sharing something which is not just about how you became a Christian, but it's actually the things that the Lord's led you into and what it means to follow him in the tough times and the successful times. The times when you get it right, but also the times you get it wrong and you discover how faithful he is to you when we're not so faithful to him. That's all part of the story. And strangely, although we often don't think it might be that inspiring, but actually it is. Actually it is, because we are wired to care about people, to look at their stories and say they matter to me and I want to emulate them. I want to find something in that I can incorporate into me, because I don't want to be me as a total individual. We try and sell that to people, be an individual, but actually we don't really want it. We want to know our uniqueness, but we want to know it in context of how it relates to other people, how our uniqueness fits with others. And so therefore we do look to others and we look to their stories, we look to their testimonies to try and draw comfort, to try and draw hope, to try and draw truth, all of those things out that aid us in following Jesus. And those things in your story that are genuinely from God, there's no problem in the fact that can become an inspiration to somebody else. That's not putting you in front of God, it's putting what God's done in you as close to them and as next to them. So really that's all I wanted to share this morning. So, I was up there at UCB doing some more of these things. And UCB, it was, as I say, for me, it was one of the early kind of, if you like, confirmations of that word that I felt the Lord was saying. So I needed to put time and effort into doing stuff that would, like writing, doing stuff on YouTube, doing stuff on radio, putting stuff out there where I wouldn't necessarily see the people who are benefiting from it, but just to, in faith and in trust, believe that actually God was making it worthwhile. And as I say, as I've meditated on it more, I'm more and more convinced that something generic there that is truth for all of us. By the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, they overcame. Your story is valuable to someone else, so make sure you get an opportunity to share it, record it, make sure your kids know about it, all of those sorts of things, to leave it behind as a bit of a legacy. So that's me for this morning. Let's just turn the camera around for one last time and see if Banjo wants to sign off in the way he often does when I'm standing still. Got anything to say, Banjo? Okay, he's lost for words. Probably see you tomorrow. Until then, I will sign off and say goodbye. Been good to be with you this morning. See you again.